On the day of our daughter's funeral, my husband booked a first-class trip to Bali with his brother and mistress. His text dripped with cruelty. "We're celebrating new beginnings. Bury her alone. You're used to being pathetic." So, I blocked all their bank accounts and mortgage loans, which I'm paying monthly. They called me in shock. 109 missed calls. The text message lit up my phone screen as I stood alone in the funeral home bathroom. My black dress still immaculate because I hadn't allowed myself to cry, not yet. The makeup I'd applied with trembling hands at 5 a.m. remained perfect, unlike everything else in my life. "We're celebrating new beginnings. Bury her alone. You're used to being pathetic." My hands shook so violently, I nearly dropped the phone into the sink. The accompanying photo showed Joshua, his brother Charles, and a blonde I recognized as Melissa from Joshua's office, toasting with champagne glasses on what was clearly a first-class flight. The timestamp, 10:24 a.m., exactly 4 minutes after our daughter Emma's casket had been closed. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that while this story contains heartbreak, it also reveals the extraordinary strength that emerges when we're tested beyond measure. If you believe in the power of resilience and rebuilding after betrayal, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us share more stories of people who found their way through impossible situations. Now, let's witness Scarlett's journey as she transforms a husband's cruel text into the first step toward reclaiming her life. I brace myself against the cold marble countertop while rising bile filled my throat. The funeral director would be looking for me. 75 guests were waiting in uncomfortable silence for the grieving mother to lead the procession to the cemetery. But I couldn't move. My legs had turned to concrete as I stared at that message again. "Bury her alone. You're used to being pathetic." 3 weeks ago, as Emma took her final labored breaths in the pediatric oncology ward, a place we'd called home for 11 months, Joshua had claimed he needed to handle some work things to ensure we wouldn't face financial hardship after the inevitable. I'd been too exhausted, too devastated to question him. I just held our daughter's hand tighter and whispered that Daddy loved her but had to work. Another lie in a long chain of them I told to protect her from the truth. My mind flashed back to sitting alone with the hospital's financial counselor 6 months earlier, mortgaging our home to cover the experimental treatment insurance wouldn't pay for. Joshua had been too emotional to join those meetings. I remembered calling him from the pharmacy when Emma's pain medication cost $1,200 out of pocket, and he told me to just figure it out. I'd emptied my retirement account while he apparently figured out vacation plans. A knock on the bathroom door jolted me back to the funeral home. "Mrs. Bennett, is everything all right?" The funeral director's voice was practiced in its concern. As gentle concern washed over me, I called my voice surprisingly steady. I stared at my reflection. My daughter was dead. My husband was halfway across the Pacific with his mistress. And for the first time in our 15-year marriage, I saw myself clearly. A woman who had carried everything: the mortgage payments, the medical bills, the emotional burden, the nighttime vigils beside our daughter's hospital bed. All while Joshua had been planning his escape. The rage that swept through me was unfamiliar and clarifying, like stepping from a foggy room into sharp sunlight. I slipped my phone into my clutch purse and straightened my shoulders. "I'm ready now," I told the funeral director as I emerged. I walked down the aisle between sympathetic faces, past Emma's favorite teacher, her little friends from before the cancer, and my colleagues who had donated sick days so I could stay with her during treatments. Not a single person from Joshua's side of the family was present. Now I understood why. At the cemetery, as they lowered my little girl's white casket into the ground, I didn't collapse as everyone expected. The earth was accepting my daughter's body, but I refused to let it swallow me too. Instead, with each handful of dirt I scattered over her casket, my resolve hardened. The reception passed in a blur of casseroles and condolences. My sister Katie stayed until the last guest left, helping clean up and watching me with worried eyes. "You can stay with us tonight, Scarlett. You shouldn't be alone," she offered, squeezing my hand. "I have things to do here," I replied. The calm in my voice surprised even me. After Katie reluctantly left, I went to Emma's room. I hadn't entered it since the day the ambulance took her for the final time. Her stuffed elephant still sat propped against the pillows, waiting for a child who would never return. On her nightstand was the framed photo of the three of us at the beach, before the diagnosis, before I learned who Joshua truly was. I picked up the frame, studying Joshua's face. Had he already been seeing Melissa then? Was he already fantasizing about new beginnings while our 5-year-old built sandcastles? The coldness of his betrayal swept over me anew. During Emma's illness, I'd withdrawn nearly everything from my personal savings to pay for treatments, second opinions, special foods that wouldn't make her nauseous, and gas driving to specialists, 3 states away. Meanwhile, Joshua had apparently been squirreling away funds for his grand escape. I sank onto Emma's bed, the weight of everything threatening to crush me. For one dangerous moment, I considered just letting it happen, giving into grief, ignoring Joshua's betrayal, falling apart completely. It would be easier than facing any of this. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I'm so sorry for your loss," Joshua said. "You wanted to handle the funeral alone, but if there's anything I can do, this is Melissa, by the way." The audacity stole my breath. So she didn't even know she was part of his escape plan. During our daughter's funeral, another manipulation, another lie, I didn't respond to Melissa. Instead, I opened my banking app with newfound purpose. I worked as a bookkeeper for a construction company. Numbers were my refuge, my expertise, and Joshua had always been too busy to handle our finances. Every account was in my name, or jointly held. The mortgage I paid from my personal account, because Joshua claimed his freelance income was too irregular. The credit cards he used so freely were all on my credit, opened when his score had tanked after college. Even his new car was financed under my name because we'd gotten a better rate that way. My fingers moved with precision as I transferred funds, changed passwords, and froze cards. With each action, my breakdown receded further. This wasn't just revenge, it was self-preservation. Joshua had left me alone to bury our daughter. I wouldn't let him leave me destitute too. By midnight, I had locked down every account, redirected automatic payments to my personal account, and left exactly $13 in our joint checking, $1 for each missed call that would eventually light up my phone when reality hit them in paradise. I finally allowed myself to lie down on Emma's bed, clutching her elephant to my chest. The tears came then, not just for my daughter, but for the life I thought we had, for the husband I believed would stand beside me on the worst day of my life. Mourning would bring consequences and complications, but as I drifted into exhausted sleep, I felt something unexpected beneath the grief and rage, a flicker of power I'd forgotten I possessed. Joshua thought he was escaping to a new beginning. He had no idea I was starting one of my own. I woke before dawn, Emma's stuffed elephant still clutched to my chest. For one merciful moment, I forgot everything. Then reality crashed back with crushing force. But the paralyzing grief that had stalked me for months had transformed overnight into something harder, more focused. My phone showed 17 missed calls, all from international numbers. They discovered the first part of my plan. I switched it to Do Not Disturb and headed to the kitchen. Coffee in hand, I settled at the dining room table that had doubled as my home office for the past decade. The irony wasn't lost on me that the career Joshua had always subtly belittled, just a bookkeeper, was now my greatest weapon. Numbers had always made sense to me. When people didn't, balance sheets couldn't lie. Accounts couldn't hide their secrets from someone who knew where to look. I'd started handling our finances 3 months into our marriage, when Joshua bounced checks for our rent and utilities in the same week. "I'm creative, not analytical," he'd explained with that charming smile that once made my heart flip. "You're so much better at this stuff, Scarlett." What began as managing our household budget expanded as Joshua's freelance graphic design business grew. I tracked his invoices, filed his taxes, and quietly fixed his financial mistakes. 7 years ago, I'd made the down payment on our home with an inheritance from my grandmother. When his car was repossessed after he forgot to make payments, I financed his new one under my spotless credit. And when Emma got sick, I was the one who navigated the labyrinth of medical bills, insurance claims, and payment plans while working full-time and spending nights at the hospital. I opened my laptop and pulled up our financial spreadsheets. Meticulous. Records of every transaction for the past 15 years. Contrary to what Joshua believed, I hadn't acted rashly. Last night, I'd simply implemented the contingency plan I'd created months ago when I first noticed unusual withdrawals from our savings account. $1,500 here, $1,000 there. Small enough that I might not notice, but I always did. I'd convinced myself he was planning a surprise vacation for when Emma recovered, or perhaps setting aside money for her future treatments. The truth was infinitely cruel. My first call was to our mortgage lender. I needed to discuss a hardship situation. I explained to the representative, my voice steady, that I'd been making payments solely from my income following my daughter's extended illness and recent passing. I needed to arrange a temporary forbearance while I sorted out my finances. The woman's voice softened when I mentioned Emma's death. People become instantly accommodating when you tell them your child has died. One of the few advantages of this nightmare. Next came the credit card companies. I didn't cancel the cards. That would alert Joshua immediately. Instead, I reported suspected fraudulent activity on our joint cards, ensuring they'd be frozen pending investigation. His personal cards, which I'd added him as an authorized user on years ago, were simpler. I just removed him. By noon, I had systematically dismantled Joshua's financial access while protecting myself. I printed confirmation emails and filed them in a new folder labeled Fortress. The metaphor felt appropriate. I was building walls to protect what remained of my life. My phone continued to vibrate with incoming calls. Finally, I answered. "What the hell did you do?" Joshua's voice was tight with panic and rage. Airport announcements echoed in the background. "Hello to you too. How's Bali? The weather must be lovely this time of year. Scarlett, my cards aren't working. The hotel is threatening to call the police." "That sounds like a personal problem." My voice was calm, almost conversational. "This isn't funny. We're stranded." "You mean you, Charles, and your girlfriend, the one you brought to our daughter's funeral?" Silence. Then, "I can explain. I buried our daughter yesterday, Joshua, alone, while you were taking selfies in first class." "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You're celebrating new beginnings, right? Starting fresh, without the burden of a sick child and a pathetic wife." I quoted his text verbatim, each word precise and cutting. That was just the truth, finally, no more pretending. I heard muffled voices, Charles probably. Joshua's voice returned suddenly, conciliatory. "Baby, I know you're upset. You have every right to be. But this isn't the way to handle things. If you'll just transfer some money for our tickets home." "No." The simplicity of my response seemed to stun him. "What do you mean, no?" "It's a complete sentence, Joshua. Figure it out yourself." I ended the call and blocked his number. The house felt eerily quiet afterward. I wandered through rooms that held the ghost of Emma's laughter. Rooms where Joshua and I had once built a life that now seemed like an elaborate fiction. In our home office, I began gathering financial documents I'd need for the divorce attorney. I planned to call tomorrow. As I pulled files from the cabinet, a leather-bound book tumbled out from behind them. I didn't recognize it at first, not until I opened it and saw the careful, rounded handwriting on the first page. Emma's super, secret journal, not for parents. My hands trembled as I held it. Emma had been only 7 when she was diagnosed. By the end, she'd been too weak to write. This journal must be from before. I hesitated, feeling like an intruder. These were her private thoughts, not meant for my eyes. But she was gone, and these pages were all I had left of her inner world. The first entry was from her 6th birthday. "Daddy promised to take me to the aquarium today. but he had to work again. Mommy made my cake with purple frosting and took me to see the dolphins anyway. He said Daddy would come next time. I wish next time was today. Simple words that cut deeper than Joshua's deliberate cruelty. I started to close the journal, not ready for this additional pain, when a folded paper slipped out from between the pages. I opened it to find a crayon drawing. A small stick figure with yellow hair standing between two taller figures. At the bottom, in Emma's handwriting, "When I grow up, I want to help people with money like Mommy does." Like a key turning in a lock, something shifted inside me. This wasn't just about punishing Joshua anymore. This was about honoring the little girl who had watched me more closely than I'd realized, who had seen strength in me when I'd felt only exhaustion. My phone rang again. Charles. This time I declined the call and placed Emma's journal carefully on my desk. Tomorrow would bring more battles, more decisions, but tonight I would read my daughter's words and find my way forward through her eyes. I curled up in Emma's reading nook, a window seat cushioned with pillows she'd helped pick out, under twinkling fairy lights we'd strung together during her brief remission. Outside, darkness had fallen, but I couldn't bring myself to turn on any lights besides the soft glow above me. The journal lay heavy in my lap, its leather cover worn at the corners from being handled by small hands. My fingers traced the embossed letters of her name. Was this an invasion? The last privacy my daughter had? The rational part of me knew Emma was beyond caring about such things now, but motherhood had taught me to protect her boundaries even when they frustrated me. "I'm sorry, sweet pea," I whispered into the empty room. "I need to hear your voice again." I opened to the second entry, dated shortly after her 6th birthday. "Today at school, Mrs. Wilson asked what our parents do. I said, 'My mommy helps people with numbers, and my daddy draws pictures for computers.' Tommy said, 'That's not a real job.' And I got mad. Daddy's job is real. He just does it in different places sometimes, like at his friend's house when he doesn't come home for dinner." My breath caught. Even then, she'd been making excuses for him, creating stories that made sense of his absences. I flipped forward through pages of typical 6-year-old observations. Which dinosaur was best? Always the Triceratops. Which girl in class was mean? Brittany with the pink backpack. Which boy she'd marry someday? Either Thomas from Reading Group or Captain America. Normal thoughts from before our world imploded. Then came the entry dated 3 days after her diagnosis. The doctor told Mommy and Daddy, "I'm really sick." Mommy cried in the bathroom but pretended she didn't. Daddy looked at his phone a lot. "I'm scared, but I don't want them to know. Mommy says I'm the bravest girl she knows. I have to be brave for her." Tears blurred my vision. I'd thought I'd hidden my fear from her all those nights, sobbing silently in hospital bathrooms, washing my face afterward, practicing smiles in the mirror. And she'd known anyway. The entries grew shorter as treatments intensified. Some pages contained only doodles or pasted hospital bracelets. Others held observations about nurses she liked or foods that didn't make her feel sick. One entry from about 5 months into treatment made me pause. Daddy came today. He brought me a new game for my tablet and stayed for 2 whole hours. When Mommy went to get coffee, he told me a secret. He said, "Sometimes grown-ups get really sad and scared, and they do things that might seem mean but aren't really mean." He said, "If he's not at the hospital a lot, it's not because he doesn't love me. It's because he loves me so much it hurts him to see me sick." I told him, "It's okay. I understand about being scared." I set the journal down, trembling with fury. He'd manipulated our daughter into absolving him of his absence, making a 7-year-old comfort him rather than the other way around. After several deep breaths, I continued reading. The entries became more sporadic as Emma grew weaker. Most were short observations about favorite TV shows or which hospital food was least disgusting. Then, about 3 weeks before the end, I found an entry that looked different. The handwriting was shakier, but the words were more mature. "Nurse Jen helped me write this because my hands are too tired. I had a dream last night that I was a bird. I could fly anywhere and nothing hurt. I wasn't scared anymore. I think dying might be like that. Mom keeps saying I'll get better, but I know that that's not true. I wish she would talk to me about it. Dad doesn't come much now. Last time he was here, he was on the phone in the hallway talking about Melissa and how complicated everything is. Mum thinks I don't know about Melissa, but hospital. Rooms have thin walls. My fingers went numb. She'd known all those months I'd been protecting her from the truth about Joshua, and she'd known anyway. 2 pages later, I found an entry that broke my heart. A new asterisk. I made Dad promise something today. I asked him to take care of Mum after I'm gone. He cried and said, of course he would. I hope he wasn't lying. Mum needs someone to make her laugh. She hasn't laughed in so long. I don't want her to be alone. Asterisk. The tears came freely now. He'd promised our dying daughter he would care for me, then booked a flight to Bali for her funeral day. The final entry was dated just days before she slipped into her final coma. Asterisk. Mum, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm sorry I tried really hard to stay. Please don't be sad forever. Remember how we always said we'd open that bakery someday? The one with the blue door and cupcakes with too much frosting? You should still do that. Name a cupcake after me. Something with sprinkles. Asterisk. Asterisk. Also, I know about Dad and Melissa. It's okay. Some people aren't strong like you. Some people run away when things get scary. Don't be mad at him forever, but don't let him make you feel small either. You're the strongest person I know. Asterisk. Asterisk. Plus, it's okay if you find someone new to love. I just want you to be happy. That's my last wish. Asterisk. I closed the journal, pressing it to my chest as sobs racked my body. My brilliant, perceptive child had seen everything. Joshua's betrayal, my attempts to shield her, the fractures in our family. She'd carried those burdens silently, comforting me when I should have been comforting her. When the tears finally subsided, I felt different. The vindictive satisfaction I'd felt while freezing Joshua's account seemed hollow now. Emma wouldn't want me consumed by revenge. She wouldn't want me defined by bitterness. Yet she also wouldn't want me to simply forgive and forget, to let Joshua continue making me feel small. She'd seen my strength even when I couldn't. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the missed calls. Now 37 from various international numbers, plus 16 text messages growing increasingly desperate. I wasn't ready to respond yet. First, I needed a plan that honored what Emma had seen in me. I walked to my home office and opened a new spreadsheet. At the top, I titled it Emma's Wishes. The first item I typed was bakery with blue door and too much frosting. The second was live with strength, not bitterness. As dawn broke over the empty house, I looked at what I'd created, not just a list of tasks, but a roadmap through grief. My daughter had given me one final precious gift, permission to find happiness again, coupled with the wisdom to set boundaries that protected that possibility. I would make Joshua face consequences for his betrayal, but I wouldn't let that mission consume me. That wasn't the legacy Emma deserved. 3 days after discovering Emma's journal, I was arranging fresh flowers on her grave when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We landed at JFK. Joshua has nowhere to go. He's a mess. Scarlett, can we talk? I didn't reply. Let them squirm a little longer. The early spring air carried the scent of damp earth as I traced Emma's engraved name with my fingertips. I'm trying, sweet pea, I whispered. I'm trying to find the balance. That evening, my doorbell rang as I was reviewing paperwork from the attorney I'd hired. Through the peephole, I saw 3 haggard figures, Joshua, Charles, and Melissa. Joshua's, normally, immaculate appearance had deteriorated. His designer clothes were rumpled, his face unshaven, and dark circles shadowed his bloodshot eyes. I considered not answering, but that wasn't the path I'd chosen. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door but blocked the entrance. We need to talk, Joshua said, his voice tense. You need to talk, I corrected him. I don't need anything from you. Charles stepped forward, always the mediator between us, even during small disagreements. Scarlett, please. We had to borrow money for economy tickets home. The hotel in Bali held our passports until the embassy intervened. We're exhausted. That sounds challenging, I replied evenly, similar to arranging a funeral while grieving alone. Melissa hovered behind them, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, looking nothing like the glamorous woman from the flight photo. Her eyes darted nervously between Joshua and me. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. You have 30 minutes. They filed in silently. Joshua moved automatically toward the liquor cabinet, but I blocked his path. Not in my house. Not anymore. He flinched, but retreated to the sofa. Charles and Melissa perched awkwardly on the love seat across from him, their body language revealing the fractures in their alliance. I remained standing. You've destroyed me, Joshua began, his tone accusatory. No, I said calmly. I simply stopped enabling you. We were married for 15 years, during which I paid the mortgage, covered Emma's medical bills, and kept us afloat while you— What exactly? Planned your escape? Built a life with her? I gestured toward Melissa, who flushed crimson. It wasn't like that, Melissa interjected, her voice trembling. He told me you two were separated, that you wanted him to move on. When exactly did this separation happen? I asked, turning to her. During our daughter's chemotherapy? Or perhaps during her bone marrow transplant? Melissa's eyes widened. She turned to Joshua. You said Emma was in remission months ago. You said— He says a lot of things, I interrupted, reaching for Emma's journal on the coffee table. Like promising our dying daughter he'd take care of me after she was gone. Joshua, you read her journal. You read her. Every word, including the entries where she mentioned overhearing. Your phone calls about Melissa. I opened to the marked page, including where she wrote that hospital rooms have thin walls. Charles stood abruptly. You were carrying on with this affair while your daughter was dying. You told me it started after. Charles, it's complicated, Joshua began. No, it's actually quite simple, I said, closing the journal gently. Emma knew everything. He protected you. Joshua, a 7-year-old child, shielded her father from judgment while fighting for her life. The silence that followed was deafening. Melissa wiped tears from her cheeks. Charles paced the room, running his hands through his hair in agitation. Joshua stared at the floor. I can't defend what I did, but you didn't have to financially ruin me. You did that yourself, I countered. Every credit card in your wallet is in my name. Every loan payment comes from my account. For 15 years, I carried this family while you took credit for our stability. What do you want? Scarlett, Charles asked quietly. Money? The house? Almost laughed. I already have those things. They were always mine. Then what? Joshua demanded, desperation edging his voice. I sat down across from him, placing Emma's journal between us. I want you to understand what you've lost. Not just your financial stability or your comfortable life. You lost the chance to truly know your daughter. This brilliant, perceptive, compassionate person who saw through all of us but loved us anyway. My voice remained steady as I continued. I've been advised to pursue full financial separation. My attorney believes I have grounds to claim everything given the circumstances. Joshua's face crumpled. Charles placed a hand on his brother's shoulder while Melissa stared out the window, visibly disconnected from this family drama she'd entangled herself in. But that's not what Emma would want, I said softly. So here are my terms. From my folder, I withdrew 3 copies of a document my attorney had prepared. You will relinquish all claims to this house and its contents. You will assume responsibility for your personal debts. I will transfer $5,000 to a new account for you, enough to secure temporary housing and necessities, nothing more. $5,000 after 15 years of marriage. Joshua looked incredulous. Be grateful, Charles muttered. She could take everything in. Exchange! I continued, as if neither had spoken. You will sign over your half of Emma's college fund, which I established and funded entirely, to the Pediatric Cancer Foundation that supported us. You will also agree to attend grief counseling. Grief counseling? Joshua scoffed. I don't need it. It's non-negotiable. I pushed the papers toward him. Emma believed you loved her. Whether that's true or not, you owe her this much. Melissa finally spoke, her voice barely audible. I didn't know about any of this, about Emma still being sick, about the funeral. She turned to Joshua. You let me believe we were starting something honest. Melissa, Joshua began, but she cut him off. I can't do this. She stood abruptly. I'm sorry for your loss, Scar. I would never have her voice trail off as she grabbed her purse and headed for the door. Charles watched her leave, then turned to his brother. You've been lying to everyone, even me. The disappointment in his voice was palpable. Joshua sat motionless, the papers untouched before him. The facade of the charming, confident man I had married had completely crumbled, revealing someone I barely recognized. Fragile, desperate, hollow. Sign the papers, Joshua, I said quietly. Not for me, for Emma. His hand shook as he reached for the pen. As he signed each page, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a profound sadness for what might have been, and a quiet certainty that I was honoring Emma's last wishes, standing in my strength without being consumed by bitterness. Charles signed as a witness, then helped his broken brother to his feet. At the door, Joshua turned back. I did love her, Scarlett, and you in my way. I thought of all the possible responses, the accusations I could hurl, the hurt I could unleash. Instead, I simply said, I know you believe that. Goodbye, Joshua. As the door closed behind them, I returned to Emma's journal and added a third item to my Emma's wishes spreadsheet. Find a way forward with grace, not just anger. The house felt different now, still filled with grief, but no longer charged with betrayal. The reckoning I had imagined for so long had come, but it had changed form. Not a victory over Joshua, but a reclaiming of my own narrative. Spring turned to summer, summer to fall, and before I knew it, the seasons had completed their cycle. The first anniversary of Emma's death arrived with a physical heaviness I hadn't anticipated. I woke that morning expecting to be crushed by grief all over again. Instead, I felt a strange, quiet resolve. I had taken the day off work, assuming I'd need to hide away from the world. But as the morning light filtered through my bedroom curtains, now a sunny yellow instead of the muted grey Joshua had preferred, I realized I didn't want to spend this day alone. At Emma's grave, I didn't bring flowers like the other cemetery visitors. Instead, I brought baking ingredients, a portable table, and a confused-looking woman named Diane, whom I'd met at the grief support group I'd reluctantly joined 6 months earlier. Are you sure about this? Diane asked, watching me set up a small camp stove beside Emma's headstone. Her own son, Tyler, had died of leukemia 3 months after Emma. Absolutely, I replied, laying out measuring cups and flour. Emma and I always talked about opening a bakery with too much frosting. Today we're making that happen, even if it's just for one day. By noon, 5 other parents from our support group had joined us. We baked cupcakes right there in the cemetery, laughing through tears as we shared stories of our children. The groundskeeper eyed us suspiciously until I explained what we were doing, then quietly went to get his own folding chair. To Emma, I said, raising a cupcake topped with an obscene amount of pink frosting. Sting and rainbow sprinkles taught me that grief doesn't have to be solemn to be meaningful. As the others raised their cupcakes in a bittersweet toast, I realized I was honoring Emma in exactly the way she would have wanted, with joy breaking through the sorrow, with community instead of isolation. The following week, I met with my attorney to finalize the divorce. The process had dragged on longer than necessary due to Joshua's periodic attempts to negotiate better terms. Each time, I simply referred him back to the original agreement, adding another small condition until he realized the price of his delays. He signed everything. No contested points, No last-minute demands, my attorney said, sliding the final papers across her desk. I scanned the documents, seeing Joshua's familiar signature on the final page. Just like that, 15 years of marriage dissolved into legal terminology and notarized signatures. "How do you feel?" she asked as I signed my own name. I considered the question carefully. "Lighter," I finally said, like I've set down something I've been carrying too long. On my way home, I stopped at the small office space I'd leased the month before. The sign on the door read, "Balanced Books and Bridges, Financial Support for Families in Crisis." The idea had come to me gradually as I helped Diane untangle the medical bills and insurance claims that had overwhelmed her after Tyler's death. What began as friendly advice had evolved into a mission. I discovered that many families facing medical crises or the death of a child were drowning in paperwork and financial stress. My skills as a bookkeeper, combined with my personal experience, positioned me uniquely to help. I unlocked the door and breathed in the smell of fresh paint and new beginnings. The walls were a soft blue, Emma's favourite colour, and the reception area featured comfortable chairs rather than the sterile furniture of most financial offices. In the corner stood a small play area for children whose parents needed consultations. 2 days a week, I would continue at my regular bookkeeping job. The other 3, I would help families navigate the financial maze of medical care, insurance claims, and, if necessary, funeral expenses, all on a sliding scale based on their ability to pay. Back home, I walked through rooms that had gradually transformed over the months. The formal dining room, which Joshua had insisted on maintaining but rarely used, was now my home office, with Emma's artwork framed on the walls alongside my professional certificates. The living room furniture had been rearranged to create a reading nook similar to the one in Emma's bedroom. Emma's room itself had been the hardest to address. For months, I'd kept it exactly as she'd left it. The door closed most days because the sight of her untouched things brought too much pain. Then one day, after a particularly good session with my therapist, I'd opened her curtains and let the sunlight in. Now half the room remained Emma's space. Her bookshelf, her favourite, the stuffed animals, her collection of rocks and feathers arranged on a special shelf. But the other half had become a creative area where I painted clumsy watercolours and crafted handmade cards for the families I worked with. Not erasing Emma, but allowing her space to exist alongside my own growth. As evening fell, I sat on my back porch with a glass of wine. The garden had been Joshua's domain, meticulously maintained for appearances. When neighbours visited, now it was gloriously, intentionally imperfect. Wildflowers grew among the vegetables. A small stone path wound to a bench beneath the maple tree, where Emma had once played. My phone buzzed with a text from Katie, checking on me today. "Love you, sis." As I typed a response, I noticed an email notification from Charles. We'd had minimal contact since the confrontation with Joshua, just a few awkward exchanges as he helped his brother move the last of his belongings. Curious, I opened it. "Scarlett wanted you to know Joshua started grief counseling last month. He's staying with me temporarily, but looking for work in Colorado. Also, I drove by your office space yesterday. It looks perfect. Emma would be proud. Charles." Unexpected tears blurred my vision, not from grief or anger, but from something that felt strangely like peace. I hadn't destroyed Joshua, despite having the power to do so, and in choosing restraint I'd found a strength I didn't know I possessed. My revenge had transformed into something Emma would recognize, not a hollow victory over someone who had hurt me, but a reclaiming of my own worth and purpose. I closed my eyes and imagined Emma beside me on the porch, eating sprinkle-covered cupcakes and chattering about her day. "We're going to be okay, sweet pea," I whispered to the evening air. "Different than we planned, but okay." The heaviness in my chest hadn't disappeared entirely. It never would, but it had changed form, becoming more like a cherished weight I carried willingly, rather than a burden that threatened to crush me. In the quiet garden, as twilight descended, surrounded by the home I'd reclaimed and rebuilt, I finally understood the opposite of grief isn't happiness, it's purpose. And in honoring Emma's memory by helping others, I'd found mine. If Scarlett's journey from heartbreak to empowerment moved you, hit that subscribe button now. Every story shared is another light in the darkness for someone fighting their own battles. Comment below with your thoughts. Was cutting off the finances justified, or would you have handled it differently?